Good day, ladies and gentlemen. From the Mouse That Roars, news and commentary at regularguy.com. I am Roger Fredenberg, your host. Continuing the effort, I suppose, to educate folks on the proper decision-making as voters, as contributors to society, to the civilization, to the greatness of America. Americans, in my view, have been duped, have been essentially lied to, deceived, forced to accept people into public office, from the highest office, like the presidency, to the lowest office in your local school board. People who do not have the best intentions for America, people who do not contain within their vessel the true heartfelt respect for our Christian foundations as a country. And my concern is that to restore America to its greatness, we're going to have to rely on a couple of things. One is our ability to do as asked by our Creator to occupy. And another is to use discernment about the kind of people that we put in positions of power in our government. And there are a few people on this planet who actually are worthy, in my view. One of them is my longtime friend and a man I've interviewed numerous times over the years, Dr. Ron Paul of Texas, congressman, presidential candidate. Joining us here today is Pastor Brian Jacobs. He is with the Metroplex Family Church in Texas, worked with Billy Graham, and he is here to share with us about this topic. Pastor Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roger. Good to be with you. It's an honor and a joy.
Well, I don't find too many pastors, Brian, who step out in this modern age, many who have contracted with the Internal Revenue Service for their nonprofit status, that have the courage to step out and say, hey, let's take a look at a particular candidate or issue. Why are you different?
Well, thank you, sir. I think I have to go back to that Billy Graham influence. You know, when you mentioned his name and my longtime association with him, and of course the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, more prominently with his grandson Will, I have to look at Dr. Graham's example and follow him. I mean, he never ran for public office, sir, but he did associate himself with leaders, and he did continually try to bring influence and encouragement to leaders, and I'm just following his example, and I believe it's a biblical example, of course, and I think it's the right thing to do, especially when it comes to issues concerning our nation, morally, and the support of the nation of Israel.
But aren't you concerned about how that might be perceived by the powerful forces at the Internal Revenue Service and the folks who might otherwise take unkind actions against you and your church for this public display of political prominence?
Yes, sir, I can understand that, and I can see that some would, be sensitive to that. But again, I believe that this is my right as an American born in this nation. My father is a political consultant. I've worked for a very famous governor and been involved in the political aspects of our nation's government for all my lifetime because of my dad. And even though I chose the path of ministry, Mr. Roger, again, I go back to watching, for example, the pattern of the model that Dr. Billy Graham has set before me and others, that we could follow him to influence. You know, again, I'm from the great state of Alabama and worked in the governor's office right across the street from the church where Dr. Martin Luther King pastored. That was his, I used to park my vehicle just directly in front of his church there when I went to work in the governor's office. And, he was a pastor and a minister, but yet look what he did to try to influence our American government system.
Well, Billy Graham didn't make a lot of political statements publicly. I read something that Billy Graham wrote, and I keep it close by. It was an article that appeared in 1959, and it centered around the subject of tolerance. And Dr. Graham made I thought, an impressive prediction about the future of America wrapping itself in the flag of tolerance, and how ungodly it really was. And I look at Ron Paul, and let me be completely honest with you. I am a huge supporter of Ron Paul. I think he's awesome. But I am a hardcore, Pentecostal Christian boy. And generally, I'm not attracted to libertarians because they often lack that moral center, that commitment to God and family and the values of Christendom. And yet, I'm attracted to Ron Paul. But is Ron Paul a Christian?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Dr. Paul has told me face to face, him and his wife, that they made a decision actually in a Billy Graham crusade back in the 1980s. And again, this is not just my relationship with him through senior advisor Doug Weed, but it's my, him telling me face to face of his commitment to the Lord. Now, again, I understand, Roger, that Dr. Paul is not outspoken, but let's look at Dr. Paul. Dr. Paul is a senior adult. Many people of his generation did not wear their Christianity as a cross around their neck, but an imprint on their heart. And I believe Dr. Paul, and I agree with you, that he represents his faith in the Lord by his actions, not just because he wears a lapel pin. I think that's an even greater witness of his love for the Lord and his true commitment to honoring the Lord with the way he governs.
Pastor Brian, a lot of people are going to think, well, Ron Paul doesn't seem to be strongly committed to a marriage being between a man and a woman. He seems compelled to want to tolerate and accept, widespread use of drugs, without penalty, that drugs should be legal. And he takes a lot of positions that, albeit quite libertarian, seem to be contrary to the Christian belief. And when I tell people that I know Ron Paul is a Christian, they kind of roll their eyes and say, how can he be a Christian if he's, willing to support homosexual marriages or other unchristian things? And maybe you could speak to that and help us understand what is it that is his obligation as a Christian and politician. If it's possible to speak to that, please do.
I will, sir. Well, again, Roger, you're right. I mean, people can, contradict him and be, in opposition to that kind of view. But again, sir, if somebody chooses to be a homosexual or chooses to do something that's not right, who are you and I to try to stop them other than, the law itself saying that if you're doing something illegal, it's illegal? I mean, human choice, even Jesus will allow you to do that. It's just there's a penalty and a consequence to it because it's violating the truth of his word. But, Dr. Paul, when it comes to individual liberty, you have the right, as one man so eloquently said, you have the right to be wrong. And Dr. Paul gives you that freedom to do that. I think we need to look at what Dr. Paul's really saying, and that is the message of individual liberty. Today or this week in California, he's going to be doing major rallies across the state there. And the reason that the young people are coming out in just mass numbers for Dr. Paul is because of this individual liberty message that he, decrees and declares. And again, it's not a liberty to be a fool, but you do have the liberty because we're Americans.
Right. Well, I go back with Dr. Paul. I mean, way back. To the early '90s, possibly. Well, I guess the early '90s. And there was a fellow that Dr. Paul was friends with who also ran as a presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, a fellow named by the name of Harry Brown. And, I used to interview these guys fairly frequently because I was intrigued with libertarianism. I came from a really deep affinity and affiliation with the Republican Party. I was a party insider. I was always, precinct committee person and involved in, the local hierarchy of the party, and was a delegate to the conventions and was just completely sold out as a Republican. But over time, as I age, I'm 51 now, as I got older, I became more and more and more libertarian and more of the thinking of Ron Paul. And sometimes that thinking did seem to conflict a little bit with my Christian identity. But moreover, I I soon understand that, or came to understand that, you know, true true freedom and true liberty are the promise of our Creator. That Jesus Christ Himself, I think today would be a libertarian. Do you think I'm right?
I believe so. I agree with you, sir. Again, I think that Jesus would have that very attitude. Again, we have the right to choose. I mean, it goes back to Deuteronomy there in the Old Testament where God says, choose this day whom you're going to serve. We have the ability to do that. We have the liberty to do that, the freedom to do that. Now, again, you and I know there's consequence for that. I believe Dr. Paul just, again, enforces the freedom we have to choose. Now, again, it comes down to the individual's choice, and he allows them to choose that, and if that's the choice they make, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. If it's right, it's right.
How do you, I mean, being a pastor, how do you explain to your congregation, to folks in your flock who ask you about these, libertarian tendencies of Ron Paul? I mean, somebody comes up to you in the office from your church congregation and says, Pastor, I don't understand him. I mean, how do you explain it to them? What do you tell them? Because I'm trying to find ways to explain to my Christian friends why it's so important to support Ron Paul right now. Help me understand how to do that, Pastor.
That's an excellent question, Roger. Again, I think the thing about Dr. Paul is I appreciate, of course, other aspects about him to me that are truly, truly powerful. I mean, again, when it comes to spending and a balanced budget, I just believe his conservative approach, for example, he wants to cut $1 trillion in spending during the first year of a Ron Paul presidency. I mean, his attitude towards cutting government waste, making a 10% reduction in the federal workforce, and these kind of things. For example, lowering corporate tax rate to 15%. All these things are positive governing, and I believe that his voting record backs that up. And as a pastor, I appreciate him being a conservative leader in Congress, and I believe he would take that conservative leadership into the White House. Again, I appreciate his record and respect his record. We always talk about, will there be another Ronald Reagan? Well, no, there will never be a Ronald Reagan, but thank the Lord that there is a man like Ron Paul, Dr. Ron Paul, who follows the example of a Ronald Reagan by what he's already done as a congressman, just like what Governor Reagan did as a governor.
Why are Christians so hard to convince? Can you give me a kind of a biblical representation of justification for Christians really getting not just going in and pulling the trigger for Ron Paul on the day of the vote, but I mean become fervent supporters, to get out actively involved in trying to break through this blockade that the media has put up in front of Dr. Paul. I mean, it's an amazing thing to me that Dr. Paul can go into Wisconsin and have thousands and thousands and thousands of people gathered together to hear him speak. And someone like Rick Santorum can have 30 or 40 people in the room, and that becomes the news story. I don't get it. I don't. And I want to give Christians some meaningful reason based on their biblical understanding, if that's possible, to get out there and get off their duffs and do something before it's too late.
I agree with you. Well, again, I think young people are. I agree with Senior Advisor Doug Weed of the Ron Paul campaign. We need for young people not only just to continue to participate in these large events that Dr. Paul is having, but yet to vote and get us the voting numbers that we would need where we could win a state. But however, there is a disgruntled going on among Christians. They're looking for the perfect candidate. And here's a person like myself whose dad was a Democratic consultant. My dad is the Karl Rove of the state of Alabama when it comes to Democratic politics. I'm associated with Doug Weed, and we're part, the Bush legacy, which is not necessarily, true conservatism when it comes to governing. And so and then now we're here supporting Ron Paul. It really comes down to the individual person. I mean, I think Dr. Paul has a love for the Lord, a sincerity. I mean, when you look at him and his wife, when you look at his son Rand Paul, I mean, you're seeing people that are truly committed. And look at Dr. Paul as a medical doctor. I mean, and a veteran. These things make him such a hero. I mean, Christians somewhat supported, John McCain, even though, we struggled there. But I think because he was a veteran, well, Dr. Paul's a veteran too. And so I don't know. I think they're looking for the ultimate candidate, sir. I think we just need to take the candidates we have and look at them and say who will support what we believe the closest to. When it comes to governing, I'm thankful for Ron Paul.
Well, and I agree with that. But you and I both know statistically that Christians don't vote. I mean,
That's true.
Not really. And so I need to feel like I've done my part to try and bring a message to Christians that will get them off their butts. Okay?
I agree.
And so, I was watching Fox News the other day. They were doing this little riff on statistics about if Christians actually had gone out and voted, say, for Rick Van Santorum, poor Mitt Romney wouldn't even be in the game. He wouldn't even be in play.
That's true.
And so again, people can sit around as Christians and complain that Ron Paul's too libertarian, but if they just sit around and allow the continual overthrow of American values by fiat, by just sitting there and allowing these elitist status quo technicians of political stupidity to continue their ravaging of America, we're going to be finished as a country.
I agree.
And I know God's a respecter of no persons. I understand that, but I'm a human being, and I have great respect for Dr. Paul. I have respect for anybody that has the courage to run for political office in the climate today. But I've got to tell you that if Christians don't get off their behinds and get out there and establish some respect as a voter bloc by being actively involved, we're going to continue to see a decline in morality in this country to a point that I think is, probably as undesirable as what ancient Rome considered normal, or Sodom and Gomorrah before their destruction. America's got to turn away from their wickedness. And we're not going to do that with the likes of a Mitt Romney or a Newt Gingrich or a Barack Obama. We've got to have somebody that has really rock solid values. And we can, as Christians, make a difference. I just don't understand why we're not doing it, why we're not exerting our power, why we're not occupying as Christ warned. What can we do about that, Pastor?
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, I have talked to Doug Weed, and we've discussed this with Congressman Paul. Again, Congressman Paul's old enough to be you and I's dad. I'm 48 years old, and you, of course, you stated your age, and he's old enough to be our father. And I think he is from a generation, again, where his Christianity is not worn around his neck, but on his heart. And so his relationship publicly, he is conservative in that. And I think Christians in majority want somebody to carry a cross and carry a Bible. And, Reagan didn't necessarily do that. But yet, like last week, Congressman Paul is meeting with key Jewish leaders. I've continually kept before Congressman Paul the possibility of him coming out publicly and supporting the Jerusalem Embassy Act to be an executive order that if he were to become president, he would, commit to moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was a law passed in 1995. These things are behind the scenes. Of course, his son Rand and his commitment as a United States Senator to the Lord. I mean, these are strong Christian beliefs. And with all due respect, Roger, with all due respect to us as believers, what has been one of our main issues when it comes to Christians, and that is pro-life. Here, for the first time, and to my knowledge, we have a candidate who graduated from a major medical school who was actually delivering babies for a living and now running for the presidency of the United States. What more pro-life can you get than a man like Ron Paul?
Listen, I'm in 100% agreement.
We're
preaching to the choir. Yeah, it makes. Hopefully, it's not boring for people. But let me ask you this: you're friends with Mr. Weed,
yes,
and I would implore you to go to him and say to him that Ron Paul has got to take his Christianity off of his sleeve and make sure that the American voters, because we're running out of time fast, they need to know. He needs to get in front of a camera and say, "Listen, I'm a born again, saved, completely sold out, bought into the deal Christian. I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I believe the Bible and the story of the Bible is the truth. And, I don't think he's well represented on that front. And I think that it's costing him, I think it'll cost him the presidency because he didn't come out and make sure that Christians understood who he was and what he was about."
Well, now, that's a good point, Roger. Back there, right before the very first Iowa caucus, Doug and I designed a letter. And Congressman Paul, of course, basically wrote the letter. We proposed it to him. And he shares his faith in the Lord. And we got that letter out to over 6,000 pastors in Iowa. And we did our very best to publish this message about his faith in God. But at the time, Governor Rick Perry was the white horse, the man on the white horse, and the Christians were flocking to him. I'm from the Texas here, where Governor Perry is governor, and I respect him as governor very much, and admire what he's done and appreciate what he's done. But I mean, when he was running at the time, he was the answer to the Christians, and because of who he was, a governor and all that, and a very strong, outspoken governor. But when, we tried to do that, and when it did not take hold there in Iowa, I think Dr. Paul in the campaign got discouraged about his testimony and faith.
Yeah, well, and again, I think targeting pastors might be the wrong target.
Yes, sir, and I can say that. I agree with you as a pastor.
I mean no insult to pastors generally, but there is a lot of fear, especially in Eurocentric congregations.
Right.
I mean, let me whisper this: white pastors can't be political in America.
You're right. You're exactly right.
And we have a black president, and so the fear of being called a racist keeps a lot of people from, stepping on toes a little harder than they might otherwise. Political correctness has become a true enemy of America, in my opinion.
That's true.
And I just really think Ron Paul needs to get out in front of the cameras and say, "Listen, 75% of you Christian folks don't even bother. I'm a Christian. I'm pro-life. I deliver babies, man. I'm your guy. What are you doing? Get real. Get out in the streets. Do it now before it's too late." There's still time to deny Mitt Romney that nomination. Mm-hmm. There's still time for a guy like Ron Paul to surge. He may not be able to get the delegates. I don't know the count exactly, but he could walk into that convention as the top guy. If the Christians in America would rise up in his behalf, and so.
And Roger, I hear your message, and once we're finished with this, I will do that. I will send a memo or an email to Doug and Weed and say, "Doug, this is what Roger and I agree on. We need to do this. Maybe we need to be more outspoken because Dr. Paul is truly a man that could really represent who we are as believers." I mean, again, Roger, I realize that Roger, there's no perfect candidate. The only perfect person that ever walked this earth, you and I know who he was, and we're celebrating his crucifixion and his resurrection this weekend. He was the perfect man. Other than that, we're all, have our things to work on and changes that need to be made. But Dr. Paul, you're exactly right, is walking the closest to that line. And that's no disrespect to the other candidates. It's just that we do have a clear choice, and I'm thankful for that choice.
Yeah. Well, listen, Pastor, it's a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, and I hope we'll stay in touch. Is there, just as a parting shot, what do you got to say to those Christians out there in America about Ron Paul, real quick?
I think they need to get out and vote for this man.
Pastor Brian Jacobs, what is your website so folks can find you, Brian?
Yes, sir. It's metroplexfamilychurch.com.
metroplexfamilychurch.com. Pastor Brian Jacobs, and you're in Alabama, not Texas, as I said earlier.
No. I'm from Alabama, but I'm here in the great state of Texas.
Okay, you are in Texas. Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
All right, then I wasn't wrong. Thank goodness. I thought I was wrong, and I wasn't. Pastor Brian Jacobs, God bless, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it.